The following was recorded at the CCHF Conference 2023 in Cincinnati.
There's seats up front if you guys want some over here. Just so you know, we're going to be passing around a sheet for if you need continuing education units. There's also available CMEs and CDEs, so feel free to sign up on that list so that we can get your names on in there. Well, welcome everybody. We're really excited to be able to start and present this to you all. I'm going to put my coffee down. So my name's Jesse Malott. I am going to be talking with you a little bit today about this idea of how we can find a way of finding joy in our work again. The focus, a lot of this is on, last year I did a talk on focusing mostly on the clinicians. This year we're really putting a bit more emphasis on leaders and leaders of all types, but also especially clinical leaders. And so we're going to be talking through that. Dr. Green is going to introduce herself in just a little minute, but I want to throw up this slide. We don't have any financial conflicts. They offered to pay us a couple $1 million, but we said no, so oh well, for the Lord. So here's who we are. So just to give you a little background on me, I'm a clinical psychologist by trade. I also oversee the behavioral health department at Christ Community in Memphis. Do we have any Christ Community Augusta people here in the audience? Yeah, all right, our sisters. Good to see you. And I also have a master's of divinity, so this is a second career for me. I used to be a pastor at a church out in California in the Los Angeles area for about 10 years before I went back to school, got my psychology degree, and decided to do this. But part of the reason why I was inspired to do this work and talk to you all about this comes out of my time as a pastor, and especially my last year there, where I went through a time period where about 30 people in our church died that year. And it was an incredibly heavy time in the church. It was small enough, it was about a 1,000-person church, but it was small enough where I got to know most of the people, and so some of the people were very close to me. It was very difficult. I also had a kid in diapers, my son. And that year, I remember constantly being called to the hospital, to do funerals, to visit people all the time. And I remember that moment where I would look at my baby boy and have to leave over and over again. And it just tore me up because I was doing something incredibly important, but I was compromising something that actually mattered even more to me to do it. And I became clinically depressed that year, and I decided to take a leave of absence during that time. And it was during that time where I spent some time with the Lord, with my family, just praying over things that God spoke into my heart about the direction He wanted me to go. And part of it was He spoke two words to me. One was humility and one was honesty. And He wanted me to be humble, to learn to embrace my limits. And He wanted me to start being honest about what those limits are and being honest with myself about what I could do. And it was at that time also that He called me to be a psychologist and change directions and do the thing that I really love, which is spending time with people and doing this work. And so here I am now, and much of the thrust of my work over the years in research has been on burnout and a topic called moral injury and trauma, both for combat veterans, but also in leaders. And so I'm really excited to give this talk with you today and to be here with you today. Dr. Green?
Hello, I'm Dr. Reginique Green, and I am a board-certified family medicine physician. I also have the pleasure of serving as Chief Clinical Officer of Operations of Christ Community Health Services in Memphis, Tennessee. And I am the clinician leader that is going to share my heart today. I want you to know that serving in organizations like we do, it is a labor of the heart. And let's see, Jesse, you want me to Oh, is this where you want me to just kind of? Well, I have an interesting story. When I was 10 years old, I told my parents that I wanted to be a physician, and I told them that I wanted to serve people that felt like God had forgotten about them. And that was a very odd thing to say at 10, especially since no one in my family had ever gone into medicine. And it's just an odd thing to say at the age of 10. So what I want you to get out of this is that there is a different path for everyone, that God has plans for your life, just like he said, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, to give you hope in the future. So on that path, I went to med school, doors opened for me. God will open doors that won't close for you. However, when you go to med school, you do not go to med school because you want to be the most powerful person in the room, because you want to be a mega businesswoman. And you don't even think about even owning your own practice, which I did do. Just fell into my lap, more or less a whole nother story. But what you think about is that you really want to help people. And so as you're on that journey to do that, sometimes just know that everything that you do along the way is going to prepare you for where you're supposed to be. So when I got to Christ Community, I had worked in private practice, owned my own practice. Christ Community was the first time 8 years ago that I even got close to doing what I said I would do. I moved to Memphis, I read my personal statement, and I said, oh my gosh, what happened to this girl? And I said to God, if you give me a chance to get on track, I'll take it. So I took that opportunity to work for Christ Community once I moved to Memphis, and I worked for a center called Hickory Hill. And I got a t-shirt that said, in the center of his will at the hill, because I was so excited. Then everybody got that t-shirt. But shortly after that, it was only my intention to work in the clinic and serve as hard and as much as I could. And I became the site lead of that clinic. And then shortly after that, I was asked to be the chair of medicine. Then COVID hit, and it was just very, very shocking. And then after that, I was promoted to chief clinical officer. So in my mind, I thought to myself, I am not qualified. I've only gone to med school. I haven't had any leadership classes or business classes. I haven't gone to physician executive MBA or even public health, none of those things. I just went straight on a path to serve. But I want you to know that sometimes God qualifies the call and not call the qualified. I know everybody has heard that. So as I kind of was in a quandary about whether I was able to do this or not, we went into remediation where we had a unique situation. We were a patient-centered medical home. We had to perform in a quality way, and that was my jam. I had been in a patient-centered medical home. I knew those quality measures. I knew what we needed to do to perform. And so I want you to know that God is so purposeful. So I don't care how you get called to the table, there is meaning and purpose and intention in your life, what God is doing. You just have to trust him. You can't focus on things that would burn you out or discourage you. You just have to trust God during the process. So.
Thanks. We're going to do a little handing back and forth. This is the first time we've kind of done it where we are going a little bit back and forth with a microphone, but we're all in it together. So let me kind of break down a little bit about what we're going to be talking about today. So we're definitely going to start talking about this topic in learning barriers that are currently out there to effective clinical leadership culture as we build that and some actionable steps that we can do to improve it. We're going to talk about some tools for identification and development of missional clinical leaders. And then we're going to identify some strategic action steps for maximizing the health of the organization and of clinicians. Man, I cannot get this button back and forth down, so it's an arrow, Malott. All right. So in talking about sort of this topic of crafting a clinician leadership culture, I wanted to just open up, and I'm going to open us up to a little discussion, but what we've noticed over the last few years is that we've had a very significant shift in healthcare. How many of you have been in healthcare for more than 20 years? Okay. Would you agree that there's been a pretty significant shift, a pretty radical change in the way things have gone? There has. We've definitely moved toward a team-based care, no doubt. That's definitely become a predominant trajectory that's gone on. But there's also been this trend to develop more and more clinician leaders. The challenges, and this is what we're going to talk about, is when you make radical changes to healthcare and you do it quickly, there's bound to be a whole lot of mess in all of that. So what is our role as clinicians? So I want to open this up, and please feel free to jump in and ask and answer this. But I want you to think for just like 30 seconds to yourself. As clinicians move into leadership roles, what do you see as some of the challenges and some of the benefits to that shift? So think about that for just 30 seconds, and then I'm gonna ask you to give some input. Is baby thinking about it right now? Yes. Okay, what you got? What do you guys think? What are some of the challenges? What are some of the benefits? What'd you say? They're not always equipped to lead. That's right. They kind of find themselves there. Yeah, totally. What else?
Some have a hard time shifting from a me focus, or like what I'm doing, to a broader focus.
Oh, shifting from sort of like my own clinical work, a me focus, toward having to think a lot bigger scale. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
A benefit is that the clinician understands deeply what's needed day-to-day in the office versus higher-ups that have financial background but have never been there before. There's a little bit of that disconnect. That is the benefit.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, the clinicians, they're boots on the ground. They kind of know what's up, what's going on, whereas people who haven't been in the clinical work or are on the day-to-day, they don't always know some of the nuances that happen on the field. Yeah?
Sometimes when clinicians move into leadership, it's in addition to their clinical responsibilities.
Yeah. I think you pinpoint a pretty significant challenge, right? So what she said is when clinicians move into a leadership role, they're adding it onto an already full package, right? And there isn't a real clear, easy way of meshing those together. Well done. How about one more person? Yes.
In some bank where it's a little bit smaller, a free clinic, if a clinician is in a leadership role, there's whole degrees that are given for like risk management and quality assurance and all of those things that leader has to undertake.
That's a really good point. When you're on a smaller scale, you kind of become the quality department, the risk management department and stuff. Like, how many degrees can a person have in order to accommodate that? That's a really, really good point. Well, thank you. So you guys said a bunch of things that we're going to talk about. And I first want to start a little bit in talking about what are the challenges for clinicians currently in our culture, and then we'll jump onto the challenges for clinical leaders. But obviously during COVID, everyone burned out, right? It wasn't just healthcare, it was everyone, and there was challenges all over. But we do know that burnout has increased significantly across all healthcare professions. Do we have any pharmacists in there? No, okay. You guys have the highest rate of burnout. If I had a sticker or something, I would give it to you. 63%. So well done. Yeah. So physicians, psychologists are the ones that have the highest severe levels of distress. Physicians have 58% burnout. But one thing that was and during pandemic, it went up to 63% even. But one thing that we noticed even during the pandemic, that at one point that physician suicide rates were at 2 times the rate of combat veterans during that time. There was about 400 per year that were completing suicide. And so we also know for mental health professionals, how many mental health professionals do we have in the room? Yes, thank you. I see that hand, sister. Thank you, brother. Appreciate it. Yes, thank you. Yes. Yeah. And Pentecostal, so look out. For every 10 mental health professionals that are coming into the field, 13 are leaving. And we see a very significant, by the way, there's the 63%, I don't know if you can see that, of mental health professionals experience also vicarious trauma with a lot of the patients that they're seeing. So we have a lot of different experiences that are going on in our field. And so when you put all that together, the question sort of becomes, why? Why is it so high in a field where people endorse really high rates of finding their work meaningful? In fact, it's one of the highest rates in any profession, is they find their work meaningful. So not only, the simple explanation a lot of people give is that, there's been a lot of change in the healthcare industry. And that's why there's a lot of burnout and a lot of difficulties going on. But there's also a lot of complexity and a lot of variables at play that weren't there before. You see that as we are becoming much more data-driven, where we're trying to become much more accountable to insurance companies and stuff, clinicians have far less latitude than they used to have. They have all these practice metrics that I don't know if any of you have to work with dashboards, but oh my goodness, they drive me crazy. There's so many different metrics that we are accountable for. We have more accountability for being productive and bringing in the revenue. Medical record system. I remember paper. It was awesome. The electronic medical records, they might provide better care, but I tell you, they have not increased our rates of happiness. Patient satisfaction. Dr. Green and I were talking about this earlier. How many of you have seen your name online with reviews and stars and stuff? Like, you can look up your name and people can make all sorts of horrible comments about you or blame the wait time on you or things. There's all these different things that go on. We have staff that support us and they are strained to the max. The salary rates that they can negotiate at private hospitals and other places, they can outpay us by an enormous amount, which means that we have limited talent pool to be able to pull from. And so there's all these different things that are going into play for the reason why we're seeing clinicians so burned out. So let's talk about the challenge for clinician leaders. Dr. Green?
So as you guys already clearly said, if you are a clinician leader, you are forced with taking care of patients, taking care of the physicians and the clinicians that are underneath you, and then also worrying about operations, regulatory things, quality measures, meeting the standards that you need to meet. So with all of this, this is overwhelming. So what is it that drags you down and gets you stuck in the mud? I think you have to just realize that this is where you are. It is not who you are. And if you get that straight in your head, you'll feel very good about it. Where you are, your position, whether you're CEO, CFO, vice president of or chair of pharmacy, no matter what your title is, that is where you are at this time. So as Chief Clinical Officer of Christ Community Health Services, that is where I am. And I want to read what I put. Your position or title is not who you are, but where you are in your journey of developing confidence, competence, consistency, character, and charisma. So like in med school, we used to say you could see your way through, C equals MD. You just have to see your way through, because who you are is what you believe, what you stand for, how you behave, and you must not confuse the two, who you are and where you are. I think there's so many examples of it, pit to palace, right? People who are the same person. I think of Harriet Tubman. She was a slave, then she became someone who led people to freedom. And so she was that same person. And so I just want you to know that if you get concerned about that, you'll start feeling bad. And then I think we focus on where we are opposed to what God has put us in this place to do. So I think you need to think about what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to be focusing on? And I think that will help you tremendously if you find yourself getting off base. And stop focusing on where you are more than what God has called you to do. And so that's David and Goliath. You know, you remember, he just got the sword. The king said, here's my sword. He was like, no, that's too big. That shield is too big. It doesn't fit. And he went out and he took the head of the Goliath off. So I do want you to know, if you do focus on the wrong things, that if you remember Peter, when Jesus said, hey, come to me, and Peter was walking on the water, he was focused on Jesus, then he started noticing where he was, and he started to sink. So it is so important, if you find yourself experiencing burnout, feeling overwhelmed, that you just find your focus. Find your love for what you're doing. Try to hear God, spend time to hear why he's called you to this place, and be obedient, and everything else will start to work out. There's one more quick thing. Jesse's gonna kill me, but I do think worth is what makes you feel bad. Sometimes you do your best work and people don't value it, but you cannot allow people who devalue you to be confused with what your worth is. It has nothing to do. You could take a diamond and throw it in the trash. I myself have found a antique in a place that I didn't expect to find it. And it had great value, but it had been devalued, but it still didn't diminish the worth of it. And so you always have to fight to know that. And the last thing I'm gonna say is witness. When you are a leader of any position, and mothers are leaders, right? You know, you're raising these kids, baby, big chickens or little chicks leaders, but people will see how you maneuver failure more so than they see how you maneuver success. So if you are failing in any department, or you feel like a failure, or something didn't go wrong, just know all eyes are on you. And that is the biggest time for your witness to shine bright. Jesse?
You spoiled the ending.
Oh, did I?
No, I'm kidding. You're fine. One of the things I love about working with Dr. Green is she's an eternal cheerleader. And it honestly is one of the greatest things that we have. I really appreciate you. And so I think that one of the things, you know, that she brought up is that it's very easy for our focus to become like on the wrong things. Now, the wrong things is different for every person. But I think part of what we're looking at as far as being clinician leaders is you're sort of squashed in the middle. It's hard to know, and please raise your hand if you identify with this, but sometimes it's hard to focus on the places that matter most because you're not sure what matters the most at a given time. Is that something that some of you have ever experienced before? Yeah. And I think as a clinician leader, there's a particular challenge, and I will tell you from personal experience, frequently my schedule fills up with all the places I need to report out to, you know, all those meetings, and it leaves very little time for my team, my people, and for patients. And that can leave me feeling drained and disconnected from my why, my reason for why I got into that. But I want to bring us to the place where we talk about, like, what is the reason why we're doing this? Why are we in it? Why is this important? Why are clinician leaders specifically also very important? Clinician leaders, they provide this grounding to mission, right? So there's no replacement for boots on the ground. They also tend to be the primary drivers of change that's actually going on in the clinic at the clinic level. And there's always sort of there's this also other part where they provide that straight line to the patient. We are the ones oftentimes that know, like, what is going on with patient care. So many of our decisions, we can make them based on data, but data doesn't mean a hill of beans if it actually doesn't change the life of a patient, if it doesn't reflect what is actually there. We also help provide that ethical footing that's there to be able to say to the bottom line, patient care is most important, right? That's a really important piece in that. And we also provide this really efficient feedback loop. When I can report upward and say, everyone can know that it takes a long time to get a patient to my room, right? But I can tell them a whole lot faster how long it's really taken to get there. And so really being able to provide that feedback loop is really, really key. So there's recent studies that are done on what are the characteristics and the behaviors of good clinician leaders. And there's, in these recent studies, and I posted these, and by the way, the notes, the slides are uploaded to the Whova app, so if you want to download those, I also added these resources on there so you can take these. But in looking at it, they saw that when it came to burnout, and specifically they studied physician burnout in this study, that when it came to burnout and well-being, it was directly correlated to the behaviors of the direct supervisor above them. So, in other words, if you're burned out, there's a really good chance that it's related to the leadership behaviors of the person over you, okay? Now, please don't take this away and say, oh, he's telling us that we need to have a conversation with our supervisors. No, I'm not saying that, because we hold a lot of responsibility ourselves for that, right? But in the area where it affects it the most is in this area of personal organizational values alignment score. So they use this, this study, this measure out at Mayo Clinic. And this is a measure that you can see here. And I invite you to even ask some of these questions of yourself, just even looking at these right now. So the idea behind this is they wanted them to answer, and they do this at Mayo Clinics, they do this for all of their clinical leaders every year, and they have their employees, their clinicians under them, fill this out about them. And the questions are like, so my supervisor holds career development conversations with me, empowers me to do my job, encourages me to suggest ideas for improvement, treats me with respect and dignity, provides helpful feedback and coaching on my performance, recognizes me for a job well done, keeps me informed about changes taking place, encourages me to develop my talents and skills, and overall, how satisfied are you with your supervisor? For those of you who are leaders in the audience, these are wonderful questions to be asking yourself about your own leadership behaviors. Because if you want to have a thriving, joyful workforce, clinicians in the field, starting here is a great place, and starting with these behaviors. So even further than the behaviors, what are some of the characteristics that we see in good clinician leaders? So even further out of this study, they broke it all out and they used 5 different measures. And it came down to these 5 different domains of what these behaviors and characteristics that good leaders do. The first is to include, so they nurture a culture where all are welcome and psychologically safe. They inform, so they transparently share what they know with the team. And this means that there's not any sort of trying to always massage the information. You just share what's going on. You inquire, consistently solicit input and ideas of associates. And one of the biggest parts about this I found really interesting is if you ask and you listen to the people that work for you, you need to be willing to make some changes based upon that information, because it can burn a person out to give the input and they go nowhere. Develop, supporting the professional development and career aspirations of the staff, being willing to pour into them, give them opportunities, and certainly to recognize, express appreciation and gratitude in a meaningful way to colleagues. But what it really comes down to, and I was really excited about doing this presentation, in part just really looking over and poring over this work, but honestly, the research really mapped on well onto the life of Jesus. Surprisingly, Jesus was a really good leader. But there's these two main categories, characteristics and values that we saw consistently throughout, that good, effective leaders, and ones not just who are good and effective, but who actually are thriving and have joy in their work, are leaders that are relational and that are incarnational. There's a whole theory of leadership called relational leadership theory that is based upon the philosopher Martin Buber. He was a Jewish German philosopher back in the day who believed that at the core of human relationships and everything is this dialogue that happens between two people where both people are willing to be changed by the conversation, by the dialogue that happens between them. You know, obviously in a Twitter world, people don't really have true dialogue too much anymore, right? It's just sort of like shooting, it's more like cannon fire over the castle wall rather than actually engaging each other. But in this relational leadership theory, what they're looking at is that leadership is not restricted to those holding managerial positions, but rather is a process of mutual influence through which an emerging social order and actions are co-constructed. It's this idea that leadership is only as good as the ability for the leader to be influenced by the relationship of the person. And leadership in this context, it values flat structures. So hierarchies that are rigid don't work so well in healthcare anymore. There's this ability for a flexible dialogue across different disciplines. So you see in relational leadership theory this idea that the relationships between operations and clinical work, for instance, is going to be one that flexes between each other, and that it's based upon the situation rather than actually, sorry, this is what we do, this is what you do. There's an ability for it to be guided by what's needed in the moment. This is leadership as dialogue. In the second place, and we certainly see this in the life of Jesus, is that it's incarnational. And I always go to the place in the Gospels where Jesus is getting on his knees and washing the feet of his disciples. And we look at that, as a model of servant leadership, of course. But I think that there's something really significant about the idea of being willing to be present, like fully present in all of the mess of the person that is working for you. Being able to recognize and embrace and accept all the things that go hand in hand with the person that's working for you. This means that we don't just wait until once a year to have a performance evaluation for there to be discovery about how our relationship is going. Oftentimes I see this happening in the professional world, is that there's an assumption that the only way to be able to ensure that you can make the hard decisions when it comes down to it is to create hard boundaries between yourself and the people that are working for you. But the truth is that if it's a hard decision that needs to be made with a person, it should be done in relationship, right? If you need to fire someone, you shouldn't first distance yourself from the person, right? There should be steps taken. There should be trust that's built. There should be dialogue and honest conversation about what's going on with the person. And that takes the ability to be present. And the second part of this is good leaders are visible in the clinics. They're there. They don't just represent people to be present. So this is where, clinician leaders, oftentimes we get put sort of in the middle space where, well, it's our job, right, to be the ones that are present. The truth is that top down, in more of a flatter structure, all the way up the chart, people should be visible. They should be seen. They should be known. And in really large organizations, of course, this is challenging, right? And that's not to say that we shouldn't have hierarchy, but what this means is that we need to be able to have places where that intersection happens between the leader and the clinical people. Yeah, you want to add something?
Yes, just, you can keep that.
Okay.
I'm just gonna, and keep it on your, I'm not gonna feel long. I just want to say some really practical ways to connect with people that you are leading. I tell my kids all the time, if you want to be a good doctor, a good lawyer, a good teacher, a good preacher, just be a good person, right? And so you don't have to be happy all the time, but there's a professional, pleasant personality that you can have. The most melodious sound to anyone is their name. Use people's names. If you're going to use it, pronounce it correctly. If you take the time, because a lot of people say, oh, just call me Reggie. My name's Reginique, but I tell people, just call me Reggie, because when I first joined Christ Community, I was called Reniqua for about 6 weeks.
Not by me.
Not by
you
Jesse,
looked at me. Okay.
yes. But he's not here today, but he's at the conference. Danny, he was the first one to say, how you doing, Reginique? And I was like, wow, Monique, Reginique. He said it was just, so I feel endeared to him to this very day. And yes, and then everybody just wants to feel valued, appreciated, and seen. So if someone is having a sad day and you just go like, is everything okay? You sure? Just noticing it. And I will highlight this gentleman right here, Christopher Ferrand. He is amazing. His senses are amazing. It's almost like if I'm feeling bad, I get an email, everything okay? I'm thinking like, does he have a camera? Like, what's going on? But it really does make a difference. And if you take care of your people, they will take care of you. And it's amazing how little you can do that will make them feel truly valued and appreciated. But saying their name, pronouncing it correctly, and just noticing, and of course, recognizing their contributions to the team, that is everything.
Thanks. All right, we're gonna open this up to another conversation. And this one, what I want you to do is I want you to turn to the person next to you just for a couple minutes. And I want you to choose one of these. So what's one relational or incarnational change that you need to make in your sphere of influence? Okay, so person next to you, just a couple minutes, just a quick dialogue about like something you've been thinking about a little bit. What's one change that you need to make within your sphere of influence, whether it be that you're a clinician, whether you're a leader, whether you're a clinician leader, or wherever you are at, what's one change you need to make? So go ahead, real quick, pair up, and we'll bring it back together in a couple minutes. All right. I hope you guys have transformed your organizations already. We're going to go ahead and bring it back in. And a couple things I want to bring up is when it comes down to the core of it, with a relational style, really what we're talking about is that how we work together is just as important as the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. it doesn't mean a whole lot, and certainly doesn't glorify God if we meet our quality measures but burn everyone out in the process, or create conflict in our teams in the process. This is where sort of an organizational fruits of the Spirit, I think, are really needed for us to be able to see the way that our teams are exemplifying the fruits of the Spirit in that way. And I'd say this about this incarnational style, right? There's many different ways that we can do that. But when we're being present, when we're being with people, I would add one thing that, and to what Dr. Green had said as well, is that we also are looking for the best in each other and setting up teams in such a way that we model that in each other. In psychological research, you'll discover that the carrot is far more powerful than the stick. And being able to wait and see, like I remember when my son was little, and he was just getting in trouble all the time. Like all the time. And I was becoming this human being that I didn't want to be. Like I was always getting on his case. And my wife and I remember, like, we just talked about it, and we're like, okay, we just need to like chill out, and we need to like wait until he does something right. And he was in a real rough stage when he was 3. But we kind of waited and everything, and I think it was something where he said thanks or whatever, and we like, yes, we're like, you're awesome, little dude, we poured it on. And we kind of have to be that with our people a little bit, is wait for those opportunities where we can really, really be present with them and see them and catch them doing it right. And so that we can shout that out. So I just want to bring that up. So let's talk about what we can do, okay? Where did I put my little clicker thing? Oh, here it is, all right. So we'll start off with some organizational strategy. So those of you who have influence over the organization, this is a little bit geared toward you. So one of the things, and I'll just kind of, are you okay if I just kind of mention these ones real quick? Okay. One is that we really believe it's critically important for clinicians to be represented in the C-suite. This is not terribly common a whole lot throughout our country. Actually, a lot of healthcare, most people are business-oriented that are toward the top. And actually, there's a lot of good reasons for that. So those of you who are more business-oriented, thank you, because we wouldn't be able to do it without you. But the top-performing healthcare centers in the country, Mayo, Johns Hopkins, Stanford, they all have a very heavy presence of clinicians in the C-suite who are executives, who are represented at that top. We also, who was it over here that mentioned that there's little training for clinicians, right? Thank you for saying that. Finding opportunities for us to be able to either send them to school or to take classes or to be able to have opportunities to learn business systems, finances, and things. There's actually a lot of online stuff. You'd be surprised. And in the resource section in here, there's a few things that you can take a look at and go to. Believe also it's really important to give away authority. There are a lot of burned out administrators because they're all trying to do it themselves. And it takes a level of trust to hand that off. But the more that you're able to give authority to others, one, it frees you up to be able to do some really important things. But then you start moving into a place where you become replaceable, which is a really important key in all of this, is that we are all still functioning and working with some assumption that we can be replaced. We're trying to multiply things. We're trying to expand the kingdom. I believe also that we need to empower micro-level ingenuity. We have one of the physicians I work side by side with, he is just incredibly insightful. And so Dr. Green, I remember, made sure that he was invited into some really key level conversations. And some of the input that he gave was, they were like, oh, we should have thought of that, right? But no one would have ever known about his ideas, or even that he existed, right? Unless he got invited into those places. And that's where you can find all sorts of great ideas. And the last is sort of being able to increase flexible and situational influence. Being able to start moving a little bit away from the silos that are rigid and being able to focus a little bit more on situations. This is what I mean by this. So we have, we are trying to create a depression management system for our whole organization and being able to do antidepressant medication management, hitting some of these quality measures. Well, at first it was a little challenging because there's 5 million different people in different departments that have their own way of doing things. What they needed really was sort of like, and we've moved toward this, is having sort of like one champion that sometimes it might be a clinician, sometimes it might actually be an operations person, sometimes, but choosing the best person for that situation that needs to take ownership and leadership over that, being able to flex in that way. So, how can clinical leaders regain joy in their work? I'm going to give some of my ideas, and then Dr. Green's going to close us out with some of her ideas. I put on these keywords here, honest and humble awareness, as one of these places, going back to the reason why I got into this. But it comes down to this idea of learning to embrace our limits. Frequently, I think that this is especially true of Christian organizations. We have a tendency to crawl up onto the cross with Jesus. Almost as if the way that we create value for our work is by becoming another person that needs to be crucified, that needs to sacrifice at a deeply painful level and sacrifice things that might actually matter more. And this is something I do in our orientation group to all our new employees. I tell them, I'm like, don't ever sacrifice the things that matter the most to you for the things that matter somewhat to you. And what I meant by that is that going back to my baby boy in the diapers, that little dude mattered a whole lot more to me than my ministry even. But I was sacrificing my relationship with him in order to do those things well. Every yes has to mean a no somewhere, right? But if you overextend yourself, frequently the no is going to be to something that actually matters to you, and you don't want to be in that place. Second, I believe moving closer to the patient work is critical for joy in our work. I notice, how many clinicians do we have in the room? I'm guessing that the times when you feel most joy is when you are right there with the patient, right? And you get to have a meaningful encounter with them. And I'm guessing that the biggest joy in your work isn't necessarily on documenting that encounter. I could be wrong, please, contradict me. That takes a lot of discipline sometimes to hone in. Now, you can't do that with all patients. You can't do it all the time. But being able to go in and get as close to where the patient is at. And if you are a CEO, I promise you will find so much more joy in your work if you can get in there and have those clinical and patient encounters as well. And I promise you, if I have CEOs in here, or CFOs or COOs or whatever, clinicians would love for you to be there. I promise. They would love for you to go on over there and shadow them. So do that. I also believe that fostering a relationship over professionalism is vital. If you are a leader, and this is something that I try to exemplify, and I remember there being this moment where, and one of my people here, Dr. Fran, one of our psychologists, I remember having a moment when I started thinking, can I hang out with this person still? But I'm his boss. Should I do that? And there was this real moment where I was like, well, I have to be deeply relational with my people. I have to continue to be able to have those things and those friendships. And so being able to foster those relationships over sort of rigid rules of professionalism. Now, please do not take this as me saying, please go out drinking, with your people or whatever. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is build and foster those relationships. They're critical, and not just with people, but with the Lord, with people in your life. I also believe that we've got to stick to our values. I'm going to go back to the clinicians. Do you remember the moment when you decided to go into your field? Do you remember that? It's really easy to forget that. And we showed that slide about all these different areas of reporting, all these different things that we have to attend to. But man, there's joy in being able to go back to like the reason why we got into this in the first place. I remember when God called me to do this work, and it was a really clear message in my pain, in my depression, about me being able to serve the poor. Like that was a real specific part. He wanted me to serve the poor, and that be my message. And that became what it was for me. And when I got hired on at Christ Community, oh my gosh, I was so excited to do that work. I have to always return to that and remember what I truly value. And the last thing I would say is that it's really easy in our lives to be reactive to things, right? To live as a reaction. And this is very true of a lot of us, I think, especially in this field, in Christian medicine, that we have to fill up every single hour full of stuff. But the truth is, there's this research that shows there's this 20% rule, right? That the people who have the least amount of burnout and the highest levels of well-being, clinicians in their work, are the ones that, and actually, sorry, this was not clinicians, this is of leaders, were able to dedicate 20% of their work effort toward the thing that was most meaningful to them in their work. 20%. That, I think, is a really critical case. And I promise you that if all of your time is being used up, the first thing to go is that 20%, right? You can't do 120%, not for very long, but 20%. Dr. Green?
So I'm going to close this out. I don't need that, maybe the mic for the...
Sorry, here we go.
Okay, so I'm going to go really fast, and I'm going to close this out. This is my love letter to you, from a clinician's heart to you, about things that I feel will help you if you are, or even if you're not a clinician, if you find yourself just losing. Burnout, to me, my personal definition, is what causes us to lose our joy and zeal in the midst of our calling. And if you have found yourself at that place, get a mentor, get somebody who can encourage you, enlighten you, someone who's been through it before. Whatever you do, don't allow yourself to stay stuck. And walk up to someone and say, hey, I would like to be like you one day, or would you mentor me? Would you help me? Could you encourage me? The Bible says, so a man believeth, so is he. I cannot tell you how many things have turned around for me because of I am statements. I am capable, I am smart, I am loved, I am a good mother, I am a good physician. I am going to figure out what's wrong with this patient. And I am telling you, the great I am has given us that. That is scripture, so a man believeth, so is he. Know that life is a decision. Your life is a sum total of the choices that you make. So I don't care where you are, you can choose your way out of the darkness, right? And so life is a decision. The most important decision we've ever made was to follow Jesus, right? Opposed to staying lost. You can choose to hurt or to heal, to hate or to love. And one of my favorite quotes is that hate cannot cure hate, only love can do that. Darkness does not wipe out darkness, only light can do that. Help or hurt, you can either choose to be bitter or better from a situation. So your current situation is not your destination, and you have to just keep pushing on. If you are fearful of a situation, the antidote of that is action. So action is the antidote to fear. I want you to know that God is still working on all of us. And so the lesson is in the tension of who you are right now and what God is calling you to truly be. And in the Bible, once people would arrive there, he would change their name. You know, Abraham, Abram. I mean, it's just amazing. But God is just that intentional. Let's change the slide really quick, because these are the things that I think really pull you down. You have to know your worth. I said before, you have to know the difference between worth and value. Learn from your mistakes, and remember, people are watching you, how you maneuver through your mistakes. So if you continue to do the same, I wrote it down in such an eloquent way that I don't want to mess it up. But basically, if you do the same thing over and over, that mistake becomes a choice, right? And at one point, it becomes a decision, so you just marry it. So you have to learn from your mistakes. You have to set boundaries, and there's so many ways to do that, but you have to say no. And a nice way to say no is, I don't have the capacity to do that right now. And you can't do everything for everybody else and nothing for yourself. So focus on the right things. You know, why you got called to this work, why you're staying here, what's the importance of it? Have you heard from God? Has he told you to move? And then also, so a man believeth, so is he. So if you always focus on negative things and hang around negative people and think negative thoughts about yourself, you cannot out-achieve your own thoughts about yourself. So if you say, I can't do it, I'm no good, I can never lose weight, you won't. Guaranteed. Be authentic. Whatever you bring to the table is you. Moses used to stutter, pit to palace. Just anytime God chooses unqualified people and he qualifies them. So be authentic, bring it to the table, who you truly are. But if you are not trained and you've noticed that there's things that you don't know, that's what you didn't know yesterday. There's no reason that you shouldn't acquire knowledge a little bit more every day. So there's resources, there's journals. If you don't want to do formal education, there's CME. But there are ways that you know what you don't know, and you should be shortening the gap between those two all the time. And stay forward thinking. Don't be negative. Keep a positive perspective. A lot of times people procrastinate, but some of the things that I've done to get myself out of a rut, I do have a morning routine. A morning routine is everything. You rewire your fire, set yourself up for success, put your mind in gear. The Bible says to renew your mind every day. Study to show yourself approved. You know what you know and stand in it, but you should be studying the Bible and something for your career every day. Take a lunch break. There's this new thing called working lunches. It's like being a little bit pregnant. It's no such thing as a working lunch, right? The truth of the matter is the first 15 minutes of any topic, and you know from this lecture, you can agree with it, that that's when you're most alert, that's when you're gonna remember the most things. And so actually taking a lunch break is the best thing you can do. If you've had a bad morning, reset it, restart it. Rate your week. Okay, but rate your week in respective, so a 0 to 10. If you're not doing well and you're not on your game, that would be a 0. And if you're a 10, that means that you're doing the best that you can in the context of what you're dealing with. It doesn't mean that you're perfect. Schedule time for yourself. Look at obstacles as opportunities for growth and problems as possibilities. So that's a forward thinking. I already said learn from your mistakes. Don't let your mistakes define you. Get started. If you don't procrastinate, not day one, but not one day, but day one. Communicate to 4 people and not just to them. So if you notice that someone needs just that little extra time, practice radical acceptance of yourself, but be self-aware to change when you know that you are your problem. And then don't quit. Look to the hills from where your help comes from. God is still good. When I walk into a room of sad people, I say, did God stop being good and somebody forgot to tell me? And that is never the case. So thank you so much. I think that is about all we can say. Don't be burned out. Keep your joy and zeal, and just know that the work that we do is so, so important. I think we're going to just pray over you. How many people are in leadership positions? Oh, everybody almost. And then people who are aspiring to be in leadership positions. Okay, and then just clinicians? Okay, so I don't know why the pastor is assigning me to pray, so I'm going to ask him to stand up here, and we're going to pass it off, but I am going to start and hand it to you. Lord, I just lift up every person in this room. I ask you to bless them from head to toe. I ask you to survey their hearts, God, and restore their zeal and love and passion for what they do. God, let them remember their purpose, God, like only you can. God, I pray increase on their life as they are obedient within their calling. I pray it mentally, physically, spiritually, financially, emotionally, and socially, God. God, just don't let anyone leave this room discouraged, God. Please let them know that you work through people the majority of the time, that their blessing could be one step away. I forgot to say in my lecture, God, that if something is going wrong, they just are a shift away, just a pivot away, God. So don't let them be discouraged, because they are much closer to getting it right than they are to getting it wrong, God. We just thank you for what you're doing for us. I pray that this conference continues to go well, that you just rain on us, God. Renew our hearts and spirits, and let us go back with vigor to continue to serve in a mighty way, so your name will get the glory and the praise.
God, we recognize the challenge of doing this ministry, this work, and how directly tied the challenge is to the joy and meaningfulness that we can have in it. I pray blessings upon everyone here. I ask anointing on every person and their work. May they know that they don't need to be enough, because you are. We thank you, God. May we be ever dependent on you, with our eyes firmly focused on you. Thank you, Jesus. In your precious name, amen.
Amen.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.